Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to provide a demonstration of how to perform moderated mediation with a binary outcome using the process macro with SPSS. So before we get started, let me note that you can obtain a copy of the data by following this link right here, and I will make this link available underneath the video description. Also, I will make a link to this PowerPoint that you see open on your screen available as well underneath the video description. So the PowerPoint will actually contain a lot more detail than I can really provide in a timely fashion in this video, so be sure to download it and follow along. So the data that we are going to be working with contains information from a set of individuals, basically survey data from a set of individuals measuring their external political efficacy, their political interest, and their intentions to donate to a political cause. So the donate variable is going to be a binary outcome coded as 0 for do not intend to donate and 1 for do intend to donate. The moderating variable in our models will be dogmatism. So basically dogmatism, external political efficacy, and political interest are all treated as continuous variables, and donate is our lone binary outcome variable. Let me note that process, the current version of process, which I'm on 3.4 right now, it will automatically detect the presence of a binary outcome variable. So that's, and so basically it will model that outcome variable using a logistic regression model. But the mediator cannot be binary or any kind of categorical variable. So any kind of regression model involving the mediator is going to by default be a least squares regression. So just keep that in mind. So at present, only the outcome variable can be a binary variable within the model. So for this first model, which we're going to be using Hayes process template number 7, what we have is the effect of external political efficacy on the intention to donate being mediated by political interest with basically a first stage moderation effect of dogmatism. So basically dogmatism is moderating this path A right here. So the idea is that the effect of political efficacy on political interest is essentially varying across levels of dogmatism. So, and if that's the case, if we find that that path A is being moderated by dogmatism, and we also find an effect related to path B, then that would signal the presence of moderated mediation going on. In other models, we could have dogmatism serving as a moderator of, say, path B, or even both of those paths. So we're not going to do that for right now, but I'm just kind of showing you that there are various permutations of moderated mediation that can be addressed. So with template 7, that's what we're going to be using for this first demonstration. So here I've opened up my data, and you can see there's our donate variable, political interest, dogmatism, and external political efficacy. So what we're going to do is go to Analyze, go down to Regression, and then go down to the Process macro, which says Process 3.4 by Andrew Hayes. What I'll do too is I'll include a link to where you can download this if you haven't already done so, and then also a link for another video where I actually demonstrate how to install it. But so you do have to have this installed. This does not come pre-packaged with SPSS. So I'm going to click on that button right there, and this is our interface. So I'm going to move the donate variable to the Y variable box. Political interest, which is our mediating variable, I'm going to move it to the mediator box. We have dogmatism, which is our moderator variable. I'm going to move it to moderator variable W. And then external political efficacy is going to be moved to the X variable box. Under model number, I'm going to go down, and this is our template number 7. So next, under options, there are several things that we can request. If we find that there is a significant interaction between external political efficacy and dogmatism, signaling basically that the path from external efficacy to political interest is being moderated by dogmatism, then we might want to probe that interaction or that moderated effect by generating a profile plot. So I'm going to click right here for Generate Code for Visualizing Interactions. Then you can see a little bit below you've got mean center for construction of products. So basically, oftentimes it's the case that in the context of performing moderated regression analysis, you'll want to mean center your predictor variables. So you have two options. One is that all variables that define products. Another is just mean centering only the continuous variables, and basically it's not going to make any difference in our context because we don't have any binary variables or anything like that, or any variables that are being treated effectively as not being continuous. So at any rate, I'm just going to go ahead and select the all variables that define products option right there, and then under probe interactions, basically this has to do with the generation of simple slopes and their associated tests. So basically, if this right here, this is stating effectively that if the interaction term for our model, that's contained within our model, if the p-value is below 0.10, then it's going to generate simple slopes, regression coefficients, as well as test results at 3 different locations along the moderator variable. So you can see we've got one option as at the 16th, 50th, and 84th percentiles on the moderator variable. The other option is a more traditional pick a point approach, which is at 1 standard deviation below the mean, at the mean, and 1 standard deviation above the mean on our moderator variable. So I'm actually just going to stick with that right there. So another option that is available when you are performing moderated mediation analysis, what we're basically stating is that the conditional indirect effect, or the mediated effect, in our case the mediation taking place between external political efficacy and donate via the mediator political interest, that indirect effect may vary across levels of the moderator variable. So we might be interested in testing pairwise differences in the conditional indirect effects, and so we can do that by clicking on pairwise contrast of indirect effects. So now I'm going to click on continue and then on OK, and we get our output. Let me also note that it takes a few seconds in this particular case because there are bootstrap confidence intervals, standard errors and confidence intervals that are being generated for some of the test results. So it takes a few seconds. And just kind of FYI, just kind of going back here really quick, you can see that the default confidence interval is a 95%. The number of bootstrap samples is defaulted at 5,000, but you can obviously change those if you want. So the first set of test results, what we have right here is political interest. We have essentially 2 regression models that are being generated with their respective coefficients. So you can see we have the first model is the regression of political interest on external political efficacy, dogmatism, and then the interaction between external political efficacy and dogmatism. So that's essentially the first model right there. So you can see in the model summary you get the standard multiple correlation. There's the R-square value, the F value, and degrees of freedom, and then our P value. So that's basically this part right here is useful for evaluating the overall model fit, and then when we want to look at the individual coefficients and associated tests, we can look down here. So you can see that the interaction term, the slope for that, is not statistically significant. So that's right there, that's telling us that the effect of external political efficacy on political interest does not appear to be moderated by a person's level of dogmatism. And so at that point, there's not really a whole lot of necessity in terms of probing the interaction, because the interaction is not actually there. There's nothing really there to probe. But just in the interest of completeness, let's say that the interaction had been significant, we want to probe that interaction, then what we can do is kind of scroll down a little bit further, and you can see that we have code that is printed out right here, and we can actually copy this and paste it into the syntax editor and generate essentially a plot of simple slopes. So I'll show you that really quickly before we move on to the next portion of our model, and that is the logistic portion. So I'm going to double click in here and kind of scroll up to this the syntax. I'm going to highlight all of this even past the period, click on and then just copy it, and then I'll go under File, New, Syntax. So now we're under the syntax editor, and now I'll just paste this in. then highlight, and then click the green button to run. So now you can see that there is a new data set, SPSS file, that's been created where we have external political efficacy, dogmatism, and then these are essentially the predicted values on political interest at each combination of external political efficacy and dogmatism. So basically, you could look at it this way. This is at 1 standard deviation below the mean. This is at the mean on the centered political efficacy variable, and 1 standard deviation above the mean on that variable. This right here is 1 standard deviation below the mean on the centered dogmatism variable, at the mean on the centered dogmatism variable, and 1 standard deviation above the mean on the centered dogmatism variable. So so what we're going to do is just plot out the simple slopes. So to do that, we can go to Graphs, Legacy Dialogues, Line, and I'll click on Multiple right here, and then click on Define right there. So now I'll click on Other Statistic, and I'm just going to move political interest down to this box right here, then external political efficacy to the category axis there, and then dogmatism, our moderator, to the Define Lines by box. I'll click on OK, and so now you can see that we have our plot of simple slopes. Now I'll tell you that when I previously ran this, when we were generating that additional syntax file, that additional SPSS file, we also get this plot, but you don't get the lines associated with it, so it's a little hard to see. So that's one of the main reasons why I kind of walked you through this second step, so you could actually see the simple slopes plotted out in lines. But you'll notice that there's not, the lines are definitely parallel. There's not much difference, and that's consistent with the fact that there's no interaction that is evident with respect to the dogmatism and external political efficacy. So clearly dogmatism is not moderating the effect of external political efficacy on political interest. Now the next part that I want to highlight, kind of going back up here, I already mentioned that we've looked at the first regression model, which is predicting political interest, which is our mediating variable. The next one is our prediction of the donate variable, and you'll see right here it says coding of binary Y for logistic regression analysis. So it's recognizing that the donate variable is a binary variable. So you'll see that we've got this model summary table up here, and you'll see that we've got model LL, degrees of freedom, and p-value. This is basically a chi-square test, and this is useful for testing whether our logistic model containing our predictors represents a significant improvement in fit over a null model with no predictors. So if this is significant, as we see right here it is, then that would indicate that a model containing the predictors represents a significant improvement in fit over a model with no predictors. Over here we have various pseudo R-square values, and here's McFadden's, which I talk a little bit more about in the PowerPoint, so be sure to again check that out. So we see right here external political efficacy and political interest are both positive predictors. They're both significant predictors of the intention to donate. And so the coefficients that you see right here, these are expressed in log odds metric. And so we don't really interpret them in exactly the same way that we do as we did before when we were looking at the regression coefficients associated with least squares regression. So basically, you would say, for instance, or formally speaking, we could say that for every 1 unit increase on external political efficacy, there's a predicted increase of 0.4439 in log odds. And so that metric probably is not going to make a whole lot of sense to you, and so I kind of talk a little bit more about this in the PowerPoint, but I will say that you can just think about this indirectly as representing the predicted changes in the probability or likelihood of being in the intend to donate group, which is our target category, relative to the do not intend to donate group. So this positive coefficient right here is basically indicating that as scores increase on external political efficacy, we would expect an increasing probability of falling in the intent to donate group. And so the same would be the case for persons who are scoring higher on political efficacy. We would expect a greater likelihood of expressing an intention to donate. If, let's say for argument's sake, that this coefficient right here had been negative, then that would basically mean that as scores increase on external political efficacy, the likelihood of falling into the intend to donate group is actually decreasing. So that's kind of the way to think about it. But I spent a lot more time in the PowerPoint, again, kind of unpacking the meanings of log odds, and I even show you about how to convert this to odds ratios and so forth. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend really any more time on that particular topic. I do want to scroll down a little bit further, and you can see that we have sections for the direct effect of x on y, which is this effect right here is basically shown up in the previous logistic regression table. That's the 0.4439 right there that you see. If we kind of scroll up a little bit, you can see there's the 0.4439 and associated test results. There's a p-value from that. All that's going to be exactly the same as what we see right here. More importantly, or more relevant to the issue of moderated mediation, you can see here we've got conditional indirect effects of x on y. And so here you can see these are the computed indirect effects at 3 levels of the dogmatism variable. So this is at 1 standard deviation below the mean on the center dogmatism variable, at the mean of that variable, and 1 standard deviation above the mean on that center dogmatism variable. So you can see all of these indirect effects are actually highly similar in terms of those values, and that would be consistent with the idea that there's no moderated mediation taking place. You'll see over here we've got bootstrap confidence intervals. There's the standard error right there. And basically we would interpret each of these conditional indirect effects using a null of 0. So if the indirect effect, or if a conditional indirect effect is not significantly different from 0, then we would expect 0 to fall between the lower and the upper bound of the confidence interval. If 0 falls outside the lower and the upper bound of a confidence interval, then we would conclude that that conditional indirect effect is statistically significant. And that actually is the case at all 3 levels of the dogmatism variable. Down here you've got the index of moderated mediation. So this is basically kind of a summary index of index and test of whether there is evidence of moderated mediation. And so the null hypothesis is that the index of moderated mediation is equal to 0. And so if 0 falls between the lower and the upper bound, as we see it does right here, then we would conclude that there's no evidence of moderated mediation. Obviously, if 0 falls outside the lower and the upper bound, then we would infer that there is evidence of moderated mediation. And then this last little piece down here, this is just those pairwise contrasts between conditional and indirect effects that I was telling you about. So you got essentially effect 1 versus effect 2, then you've got 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 3 and so forth. So these are all additional tests that that might be useful when making a judgment for or at least describing any kind of moderated mediation effects. Okay, so now let's look at a second model. This is actually template number 8 using Hayes macro. In this case, we've got dogmatism not only moderating path A right here, but also moderating this path C prime right here. So in this case, the effect of dogmatism, basically dogmatism is serving as a moderator of the direct effect of external political efficacy on the donate variable. So now we have 2 interaction effects that are being considered in this particular model. So to run that analysis, I'm just going to go back up to Analyze, Regression, and then go down to Process right here again. And we're going to set this now at Model 8. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave everything else as is. So I'll click on OK. And so now it's going through the process of running that analysis. It takes a few seconds again, particularly as we're carrying out the bootstrap of those confidence intervals. So now you can see the first model right here that's got political interest as the outcome. This is our mediator again, and basically all of this information is going to be exactly the same as what we had before with model 7. So I'm not really going to spend any time discussing this because there's really nothing else to discuss. We already know that there's no evidence of a moderated path A associated with our model. So I'll scroll down, and now you can see our logistic regression results. You can see that the model fits significantly better than a null model with no predictors. And now you can see that we have external political efficacy, there's political interest right there, dogmatism, and now we have the interaction term that I was telling you about. So that is external political efficacy by dogmatism. And you can see right here, lo and behold, it's not statistically significant. So that C prime path does not appear to be moderated by the dogmatism variable. So if it had been, again, we might want to further probe that interaction. And so as you can see, if I scroll down right here, you can see that we've got that syntax that I was telling you about. Now I will tell you this, again, kind of in the interest of completeness, I'm going to go back under here and go under options. And I want to show you that, again, because this is set at if p is less than 0.10 for that interaction term, then you would generate simple slopes and test results for those simple slopes at these three levels of the moderator variable. But just to show you what would happen if we did actually obtain those results, I'm going to go up here and click on always, and we'll go ahead and click on continue, and I'll just rerun the analysis. And as I said before, it takes a few seconds. Okay, so now we've got it up, and so we'll kind of scroll down. First off, going back to that first model right here, there's our political interest. Again, there's our interaction for that model that was not significant. There's our syntax as before, but now right here, these are those conditional effects. These are basically the simple slopes for the effect of, in this case, external political efficacy on political interest at the three levels of dogmatism that we specified before. So these are the levels of dogmatism, three different levels, and then these are the simple slopes tests. You can see all three were statistically significant. And so if we had found a significant interaction and we wanted to probe it, we could use both the plot of those simple slopes as well as examining the simple slopes test right here. Scrolling down and going back to where we kind of started from, there's our donate variable again. There's our interaction term. We found that that was not significant. As we kind of scroll down a little bit further, you can see this is how we could generate a plot of essentially simple slopes, if you will, and then these are the simple slopes tests right here at each level of the dogmatism moderator. So again, one standard deviation below the mean at the mean, and one standard deviation above the mean on our centered dogmatism variable. And so you can see none of those actually turned out to be statistically significant. So just let's go ahead and probe the interaction just from our logistic regression. So I wanted to show you how to do this if it were the case that the interaction was significant. So I'm going to double click and go back up to our syntax right here, and I'm going to highlight all of this, and then press copy, and then go back under new syntax, highlight, and then run. So you can see right here, as I had mentioned before, it generates this kind of plot right here, but we can't get our lines. So what I'll do is go under this new data set that's been created, and you'll notice that there's our three levels of external political efficacy and dogmatism, and then we've got this variable right here. This is donate, and these are basically predicted logits from the logistic model, and then these are actually predicted probabilities associated with the target group membership. So you could either plot the simple slopes related to the logits, or you could plot out the relationship between your focal predictor and the probability of target group membership at different levels of the moderator. So I'm going to do both just to show you what that looks like. So what we'll do is we'll click on Graphs, go down to Legacy Dialogs, and we'll click on Line right here. Next, go to Multiple and then Define. And then we will move. I'm going to start off by plotting out the predicted logit. So I'm going to move, click on Other Statistic and move Donate over to the variable box right here. External political efficacy will go on the category axis. Dogmatism will go on the Define Lines By axis right there. And we'll click on OK. And so now you can see this is a plot effectively of the simple slopes. But the outcome variable, or the outcome that we're looking at, is predicted logits. And so you can see we have 3 lines right here. And if we do this using the probabilities, this is what we end up with. And you'll notice that the lines are bent. And the reason why is because the relationship between the predictor and the probability of group membership is inherently nonlinear, and that's one of the main reasons why we are carrying out logistic regression in the first place. There's not a linear relationship between the predictor variables and the probability related to group membership, because probabilities are bounded at 0 and 1. So we essentially are linearizing the relationship between the predictors and the outcome by way of the vehicle of logits. And so that's essentially this graph right here reflecting the relationship between external political efficacy and predicted logits at 3 levels of dogmatism, and that's why the lines are all straight. But we also see that they're quite parallel as well. In the graph below, the bend in the line is reflecting the fact that there's that nonlinear relationship between our predictors and the probability related to target group membership. But you can see the 3 lines are very similar in terms of being parallel across the 3 levels of our dogmatism moderator variable. So now going back to our original output, as we're kind of scrolling down, then you can see that we have, in this particular case, we also have our tests of the conditional indirect effects of X on Y. So remember that our basic model, we have external political efficacy, the effect of political efficacy on intentions to donate being mediated by political interest, but that mediation or that indirect effect is being modeled at different levels of the moderating variable dogmatism. So here, these are all the indirect effects of external political efficacy on donate at 1 standard deviation below the mean on the center dogmatism variable, at the mean, and then 1 standard deviation above the mean on the center dogmatism variable. So as you can see right here, 0 does not fall between the lower and the upper bound of our confidence intervals for any of those conditional indirect effects. So all 3 of those would be statistically significant. Down here with our index of moderated mediation, there's our index right there, and you can see that 0, the null, actually does fall between the lower and the upper bound of the bootstrap confidence interval. So that's going to indicate that we do not have evidence of moderated mediation taking place with this particular model. And then once again, you can see below we've got our pairwise contrast between the conditional indirect effects, if you want to kind of unpack that a little bit more. Okay, one last model that I want to show you is process model or template number 58. So in this case, we've got dogmatism serving as a moderator of both paths A and B. And actually model 59 would include dogmatism as a moderator of C prime as well. But I'm just going to stick with this particular model as the last demonstration in this particular presentation. So to carry out our analysis, we'll go back to Analyze, Regression, Process right here, and I'm going to set model number up to 58. And under Options, I'm just going to leave everything as it is, or as we've been using before. So I'm just going to click on Continue and then on OK, so we can take a look at our output. So now you can see, again, it takes a few seconds to generate the output. So for our first model, again, we are predicting political interest. This is our least squares predicting political interest, which is the mediator. And all of these results are going to be exactly the same as what we had before with models 7 and model 8, because essentially we were looking at the moderation of path A. So whether it was model 7 or model 8 or now model 58 or template 58, all three of those models assumed that path A was being moderated by dogmatism. The difference in this particular case is that now we have dogmatism also moderating path B, and so now when it comes to the logistic regression predicting donate, it's going to look a little bit different from what we've had before. So I am going to go ahead and scroll down to that output, and you can see right here there's our outcome variable donate. You can see it's reflecting binary logistic regression as we said before. There's our chi-square test right there. So our model containing our predictors represents a significant improvement in fit relative to the null. And you can see there's external political efficacy, political interest, dogmatism, and then we have this interaction term right here. And the interaction is between political interest and dogmatism. So that's so this is essentially testing whether that path B in our moderated mediation model is being moderated by dogmatism. So you can see right here it actually is not statistically significant. Pretty much none of our tests of moderation indicated statistical significance. So it's kind of a drag, but hey, it is what it is. So, but at any rate, we can kind of scroll down, and once again, you have the output related to these are basically your simple slopes test results. These are the actual simple slopes for path B at the three levels of dogmatism and their associated significance tests given right there. Here's our output. If we wanted to plot out the interaction or the simple slopes, we can do that just the same way we've done before. And then as we scroll down, you'll see that now we've got again our indirect effects. So these are all the conditional indirect effects at our three levels of dogmatism. You can see that the null of 0 does not fall between the lower and the upper bound of the bootstrap confidence interval. So all three of those conditional indirect effects are statistically significant. Now you'll notice that there is no index of moderated mediation in this particular part of the output, and that basically relationship between the moderating variable and the conditional indirect effects is nonlinear, so you're not going to get that in this particular case. But you can still kind of evaluate whether there's evidence of moderated mediation, kind of going back to the individual paths within the regression models and identifying those significant moderated effects and so forth. And then you can also kind of look at these pairwise contrasts and basically compare conditional indirect effects and see if there are any differences between them. And so you can see once again down here that basically the null of 0 is not falling between the lower and upper bound of any of these bootstrap confidence intervals that are comparing these conditional indirect effects. So overall, the result of this and really all of our models was there was no evidence of moderated mediation taking place. So that pretty well concludes this demonstration. I know it was a fast run through a lot of details. That is why that PowerPoint was put together for you, so that you can take a little bit more time and process what I've gone through. So I appreciate you watching, and you guys have a good day.